Now, after weeks of intense negotiations, the UK and the European Commission last week reached an agreement on the terms of a Brexit divorce, paving the way for the next phase of talks to begin. Well, one of the major sticking points in reaching a deal was the Irish border, as Northern Ireland has the only land border between the UK and the EU. Today's Focus Report is from Hervé Amoric, Albert Kirk and Steve O'Reilly.
The tranquil Shannon-Erne Blueway. Rivers don't stop at borders, and yet this stretch of water forms part of what is probably the most debated frontier in Europe.
At the moment, as we sail down the river here, we are probably just going right on the middle of the border. On my left here is Northern Ireland. On the right-hand side is Southern Ireland, part of Irish Republic. So basically, it's an invisible border.
Invisible, frictionless. This is how the vast majority of people on this island want to keep it. Martin McVicar is a businessman who grew up here on the southern side of the border, marked by this bridge.
Myself and my grandmother regularly used to come to a town in Northern Ireland, Ochnaclye, and we used to come through this route, but this road was blocked. If you're growing up today on the island, either in the north or in the south, and someone says, well, you can't cross, that's another country, it seems like someone's taken off your right arm or your left arm.
Sean Drum rents out boats to tourists on the Shannon-Erne. Inland waterways have been run on an all-island basis since the peace agreement was signed almost 20 years ago. Many, like Sean, feel proud of this example of north-south integration, but they point out that Brexit could reopen the question of British-Irish identity.
Probably more people are beginning to think, would we be better off with a united Ireland and none of this mess.
So Brexit's had an effect of bringing the constitutional crisis. Should there be a border? Should Northern Ireland remain in the UK? This has become more of an issue than it had been for the last few years. So the peace process has sort of dampened that problem down. Brexit has brought it to the fore.
COMBILIFT is based in the border town of Monaghan. Martin McVicar's company employs 500 people and plans to double its production next year, exporting forklift trucks mainly to the EU and to the UK. For him, Theresa May's recent promise to Ireland's manufacturers came as a relief.
The promise at the moment is that there's going to be no hard border, which is going to mean no physical border, no infrastructure, which is very welcomed. I don't think anyone's had promised that there's going to be no tariffs. If there's no trade agreement, if the UK exits the European Union, which is planning to do, there's going to be tariffs being introduced unless it's negotiated in terms of zero tariff rating.
Close by is one of Ireland's largest mill cooperatives. Like Patrick's boss, Gabriel Darcy, knows the border area intimately.
I was a young army officer. I actually used to patrol the border. The British Army were patrolling north of the border and the Irish Army patrolled south of the border. Of course, we had to have unofficial communications because official communications were not so good at the time.
Since then, British-Irish relations vastly improved, but Brexit could change things for the worse. Over 1,000 farmers from north and south deliver 500 million litres of milk every year. If there was no border deal here, the agri-food sector in Ireland would be decimated.
It's not just a political issue, it's an economic and a social issue. We have a seamless border at the moment. Families, businesses, farmers in Patrick, they have got cows that are grazing in the Republic of Ireland but are milked in Northern Ireland. So the concept of reintroducing and going back instead of going forward just simply will not be accepted.
North of the border, 40% of people voted in favour of Brexit. This farm, with 300 dairy cows, is one of Patrick's producers. Colin Hughes wants to continue to trade with the EU, but from the outside.
We were for Brexit all along because a lot of the rules and regulations that are being enforced on us by the EU it's getting very, very difficult to farm. There'll obviously have to be some agreement. Just if there was no agreement, that wouldn't work either. There'd have to be a trade agreement.
Farmers like Colin are the backbone of the electorate of Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party. DUP MPs like Jeffrey Donaldson want to leave the EU. Without his support and that of his 9 DUP colleagues at Westminster, Theresa May does not have a majority in Parliament. And that gives the party a powerful voice.
We want to be part of the UK leaving the European Union, doing new trade deals with the rest of the world, but continuing to trade in a positive way with the Irish Republic and with the rest of the EU. We're also pleased that there is a commitment on all sides to a soft border. That's what we want. And in the end, the UK is absolutely committed to achieving that outcome.
Whether a trade deal is agreed or not, the Irish border is likely to be a dominant issue in the Brexit talks until the end.
Well, for more on this story, I'm joined in the studio by Christophe GILLISSEN, Professor of British Civilization at the University of Caen. Professor, thank you very much for giving us your time here on France 24 today. Why has this border been such a bone of contention?
Well, it's at the very heart of Irish politics. It has been at the heart of Irish politics for over a century. It was imposed in 1920 when Ireland was partitioned. And during the years of the conflict, in the 1970s and 1980s, when a hard border was established to prevent IRA members attacking in the north and so on, that precipitated an economic decline along the border. The border area was devastated from an economic point of view. Now, since the 1990s, that has changed because the border has more or less disappeared in everyday life. People can go through it. Businesses can, deal with customers on either side. Cows, engines, and so on can be moved back and forth. And there has been strong support from the European Union to help the border area enjoy an economic recovery. And over the last 20 years, there has also been an attempt to promote cooperation between the north and the south in terms of infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Waterways, yes, but also hospitals. Ireland is a fairly small country, about 6 million people. So you have some hospitals in Dublin that are specialized in some kinds of treatments. And if somebody falls ill in the north, they can be moved to Dublin. The border has largely disappeared. If it was to be reintroduced in 2019, it would create an incredible amount of difficulties for businesses, for people, for patients, for tourists, for people who live on one side of the border and who work on the other side. So there is a consensus between the British government, between the representatives of the European Union, the Irish government, obviously, that must not happen. Everything must be done to preserve a seamless border. But in practice, of course, it's extremely complicated to do so if the UK leaves the EU.
So what does last week's deal then mean for the border region, and what do you expect Brexit's effect to be over there?
Well, the agreement is rather ambiguous. It says that, basically nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So the ball is still in the air, so to say. But there are a number of important points in that agreement. The British government has reiterated its full commitment to the peace process. There will be no obstacle to north-south trade exchanges, and it is stated explicitly that if there was no trade agreement between the UK and the EU, in that case, the full regulatory alignment would be maintained between the north and the south. So that suggests that in practice there may be a very soft Brexit to prevent a hard border being imposed again in Ireland.
Now, how important are Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party, the DUP? They are quite powerful in these Brexit dealings.
Yes, well, they're the first Northern Irish party in terms of votes and in terms of seats in the Northern Irish institutions. Now, in Westminster, in the national parliament, they only have 10 MPs, 10 seats, which is, very little. But in this case, it makes all the difference between the Conservative government remaining in office or losing its majority, provoking new elections. So they can impose their desires on the British government. And that's what has happened, in fact.
Okay. Professor, thank you once again for your time. That was Professor Christophe Gillissen from the University of Caen.